Look, I know what you're thinking. Weird title. And I know, but let me explain. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about consciousness, and I've come across an idea which is actually pretty simple and shines a light on this whole concept of free will. I'm sure I can't possibly be the first one to have come up with this, but it is certainly something worth talking about. So, let's begin. With the help of people like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, nowadays we have a well-established belief in the subconscious mind. And through recent studies, we figured out that our subconscious controls more of us than we think. And this is a truly interesting concept, because we don't really understand our relationship with our subconscious. It's a thing that we reference a lot, but we don't actually understand it. Although, to be fair, we understand consciousness even less. And when discussing these concepts, a very important question comes up. Where exactly is the line between conscious and subconscious? Luckily, this isn't an insanely complex question. It's something we can actually answer simply by thinking about it. So, in our daily lives, what is our subconscious responsible for, and what is our conscious responsible for? Let's dive in. Okay, so some obvious subconscious functions are breathing or blinking, which we don't actively control most of the time. So they're mostly subconscious. Fair enough. But then there's things like emotions and preferences, which, if you think about it, we don't really control either. We don't choose our current emotions, just like we don't choose what we like and dislike. Nobody chooses to like a show or a book, and nobody chooses to feel good or bad about the situation they're in. These things are simply out of our control. Our brain controls them, not us. So again, it's something subconscious. But wait, you may say. If we choose to, we can have control over these things. If you want to, you can breathe manually. And it is possible to change your mood and force yourself to see the bright side of a situation. But then I'll say, hear me out. What about decision making? Decision making as in deciding to do anything you do. But how could decision making possibly be something subconscious? Decision making seems to be the one thing fully under our control at this point. Let's think about this logically though. Decisions can be split into subcategories: rational and irrational decisions. Irrational decisions are quite clearly not controlled by us, for clear reasons. It's irrational. It has no reason and no logic behind it. Therefore, it must derive from our subconscious. For example, if you have the option between two pieces of candy of the same size, the same color, and the same shape, the decision you make is irrational. Now, this example is a paradox created by 14th century French philosopher Jean Buridan, called Buridan's donkey. Buridan proposed a situation in which a starving donkey is standing between two equally close, equally large, and equally luscious piles of hay. Now, how can the donkey possibly decide which one to go to? They're both identical. So, which way? Left or right? Left or right? Well, not being able to choose one of the two, the donkey starves to death. Yeah. The donkey in this case is representative of a mind without a subconscious. Therefore, a subconscious mind is necessary for a situation in which an irrational decision is needed. So, what about rational decisions? Well, most decisions that we make throughout our lives are probably considered by most to be rational. But there's a reason behind every decision. There has to be. That's what makes it rational. You choose not to harm a person that you're angry at because you know that it's wrong. And that sense of wrong and right is something that has been built into you throughout your life. So yeah, every decision has a reason behind it. That sounds plausible. But think about what that means for a second. It means that anything you do or say is influenced by your beliefs or morals, which are based on your experiences, which means that they're controlled by your subconscious. Every decision has a reason, and that reason has a reason behind it as well, and so does that one. Basically, every single experience of your life up to the moment of the decision led you to do whatever you did. But in the moment, you weren't thinking about why exactly your experiences led to this decision. It happened subconsciously. Even the easiest decision, like, would you press this button to get $1 million at nobody's expense, are decided by your experiences, telling you that money is good. To anyone who hasn't had a regular human experience, it's just useless paper. So every single decision you make is subconsciously made. And that means that everything, and I mean everything, going on in your brain is subconscious. I know it's a little drastic to say, but just think about it. Even though you can manually blink or change your mood, who made the decision to do so? Every single decision you make is subconscious, and every thought you have is not actually you. It's just your subconscious. In the sense of a completely unpredictable conscious being, you don't exist. And theoretically, it's possible to predict every single one of your future decisions, given all information of your past. What you actually are is nothing more than a complicated robot. Right now, you're probably a little confused, but what I've stated isn't all too complicated, and really it's pretty plausible. And it's not a possibility or speculation, it's the truth. But we humans tend to not believe something that contradicts how we feel. And we do feel conscious. It does feel like we have free will. It does feel like we can make completely random choices and decisions. But we can't. So what exactly gives us this feeling of consciousness and free will? Well, mostly the fact that we don't know the future. But most importantly, we humans feel like we have free will because we don't understand ourselves. And that's true. We don't understand ourselves. We don't and can't understand why we did something, and we don't understand what experiences in our past led us to this decision. Whenever we do something, we don't see the roots of it all or what led us to this moment. So we feel like we are doing it by our own volition. And therefore, the illusion of unpredictability is created. We feel conscious because we don't understand ourselves. Imagine a mind stuck inside a machine, a robot. The mind can look out at the world and experience everything the robot does, but it can't control it. Eventually, the mind begins to believe that it does have influence because its thoughts line up with what the robot is doing. That must be me doing it, it thinks, but in reality it's just trapped, helpless, not being able to truly influence anything or anyone. If you're thinking that this means something enormous for your daily life, it doesn't. Yes, your actions are fully controlled by your subconscious, and it's technically possible for a machine to predict your future decisions, But to be honest, does it matter? Outside the realm of philosophical implications, which I'm going to get into next, the fact that free will doesn't exist doesn't change anything. You still feel like you have free will, and you have no clue what you're going to do next. Nothing has changed. Life is still the same. Now that we have got that out of the way, let's discuss the philosophical implications of this. First of all, a lack of free will allows the possibility for a deterministic universe, meaning everything is predetermined. And personally, it makes a lot of sense. The only argument against determinism was that humans must have free will because it feels like we do. Now, having countered this argument, a deterministic universe is perfectly possible, but of course not definite. Of course, physics and metaphysical philosophy make a lot more sense in a deterministic universe for reasons that I'm not going to get into right now, but I hope to sometime soon. Now, the second implication of all this is a lot more interesting in my opinion. Well, some of the biggest philosophical questions revolve around the idea of consciousness. Two of these are, well, what is consciousness and when did consciousness begin? The latter is basically asking at which point a mind can be labeled as conscious, or from cell to human, where is the line for consciousness? As I just mentioned, we feel like we have free will because we don't understand the reasons for our decisions. Therefore, one can say that consciousness is what happens when a brain becomes so complex that one part of it begins not understanding the rest. Before, it was a robot, a machine. But by adding this part that doesn't understand its own choices, it assumes its own free will, becoming conscious. Therefore, the point when something becomes conscious is when the reasons for its decisions become too complex for itself to understand. That's where consciousness begins. It doesn't have to do with souls or spirits. It's about the complexity of mind. Which also makes sense, doesn't it? And it makes sense for something to gain consciousness the more complicated it gets. So, why aren't we discussing this idea? Because nobody really wants to admit that humanity has no free will, and that it's probable that we're theoretically enslaved by a deterministic universe. It's really not a nice thought. But I believe I have a way of putting an optimistic spin on this. Even though you don't have free will, it does feel like you do, and really that is all that matters. If you feel like you have free will, you kind of do. You don't know what's going to happen next. Even though the future is most likely predetermined, alongside every single one of your future decisions, you have no clue what they're going to be. Imagine it like an adventure of self-discovery. You'll go through life figuring out who you are, what you are. In my opinion, this makes life more beautiful. Things don't have a purpose, but they have a direction. Simply because everything that will happen is meant to be. Aside from that, this whole thing means that every single one of your experiences has molded you into what you are now. It's just nice to think that every win, every loss, every happy and every sad moment leads somewhere. Even though the fact that free will does not exist is technically nihilist, it paradoxically makes life more beautiful, at least in my eyes. Now, I have very superficially and very quickly brushed over a lot of ideas in this video, so I'll soon make some videos deeply discussing some of the metaphysics and consciousness stuff that I've mentioned. But for now, all I can say is see you next time.